This is a video of the test review for Chapter 1 in Math 96. There are basically two main problems in this test review, and each video I hope will just concentrate on one problem. I want you to notice the directions. It says justify and show the means by which you arrive at your answers in order to get full credit. Your answers must be labeled for full credit. You're to use a ruler where it's applicable, and all graphs that you should draw, and there's just one here, should be properly labeled as we discussed in class, and it should best utilize the space on the grid. That means that when you plot the points, it shouldn't all be shoved into some corner. It should make use of the graph. Problem number 1, in the world of bicycles, a light bike is generally an expensive bike. Obviously, the lighter the bike, the faster it can go because you can exert less energy. Consider the data for the weight of the bike frames as a function of their price. So here's the weight of the frame, and this is about how much it would cost for those weights. So just if you take a look at it, you can see that these weights are going down, and the lighter it is, the more expensive it is. The job here is to make a graph of this data and then add a trend line. Well, I have mine already done because I didn't want to take up too much time drawing all my lines and whatnot. But the very first thing that I did was I looked over these numbers here, and I decided how I wanted to spread them across the x-axis. Remember, this part is the x and this part is the y. Now, also keep in mind that when you decide where your numbers are going to go down here, it doesn't necessarily have to start at 0 over here. I'm starting mine, but I just picked this point, and I decided that was going to be 24. And the reason I can do that is I'm not really concentrating on anything way down in this area between 0 and 24, although there's one point that's 23. And then when I decided on my y-axis, I focused on this, and I saw that the highest number was 960, the lowest 240. So I decided to start at 200, and the spaces in between I decided to do in jumps of 20. So this is 220, 240, 260, 280, and 300. I decided to call my graph bicycle frames weight versus cost. I guess I could put a comma in here. And on my x-axis, since this is the weight in ounces, I copied that exact thing, weight and then in ounces. And over here on the left, I haven't put that title in yet, so I'm just going to call it expense. And it's going to be in terms of dollars. So I'm basically just copying these titles, and that should work just fine. Okay, the first problem on here asks to find the slope to the nearest tenth, so we're going to take it out 1 decimal point, between the 23rd and the 24-ounce frames, and explain its meaning in context in a complete sentence. Show work using equations and include the units. Well, these numbers here I'm going to find off of this table, so I'm interested in the one that's 23,960 and the other one that's 42,240. And I wrote that ordered pair right here. So I'm going to go ahead and first find the slope between these 2 points, M standing for slope. Here's the difference between the y's, and this is the difference between the x's. And I went ahead and put this information in my calculator, and I got a negative 37.8947. So I wrote it out 4 places so that you could see what I got. And then I went ahead and I rounded it off to the nearest tenth, so I got a negative 37.9. And I rewrote it just so that you could see it with the units on there. These are dollars on the top, and these are ounces on the bottom. So my final answer, so to speak, on my slope is just a negative 37.9. For me to explain its meaning in context in a complete sentence, I could say, and then there's lots of different ways to say it, the price of a bike, actually it's the price of the bike frame of a bike, and put that in here, of a bike frame, increases about $38. I went ahead and rounded that up. I'm giving an estimate, about $38 for every 1 ounce increase in the weight, Actually, for a 1 ounce decrease in the weight. As the weight of the frame goes down, the price of it goes up. Okay, on part C, it says choose 2 representative points from your trend line and find its equation, show the work, and round it to 2 places. On my trend line, I found two sweet spots. I put one over here and one over here. You can pick any two you want. Just make sure they're in a real sweet spot. And the 2 points that I found were 3640 and 39.5, 280. And again, I went ahead and found the slope using the same process as before. Once I find that slope, I'm going to use the slope-intercept form, and remember that's y is equal to mx plus b. And I'm going to rewrite this using negative 37.89, and I'm going to stick that slope in there. And what I'm going to do is, after I put that slope in there, I'm going to pick one of these points to make use of for my x and my y in that equation. And I decided to go for the first one. So I put the 30 in for x, and I put the 640 in for y. And then all it amounts to is just solving for b. And I ended up with that. Once I get b, now I've got slope and I've got the y-intercept, and now I can just go ahead and write the general form for that equation for that application. Y is equal to negative 37.89x plus 1,776.7. Use regression on your calculator to find an equation for the trend line and round it to 2 decimals. So you're going to have to enter the data in your calculator into the list, and I have mine, I believe I have mine already done. And those are the 2 lists right there. And I went ahead and made use of those, and then I did the regression by saying stat, and I went over to calc, hit the button 4, and just hit enter a bunch of times. And there's my equation right there. It's all laid out. And I'm going to ahead and follow the directions. It says round to 2 places. So it's A, here's the format. A is negative 37 point, and I rounded that to 18 x. And then the B part of it is right down here, 1763.74. And there it is right here. So here's my equation that I got using regression. Use a regression equation to predict how light of a frame you might get if you spent $1,200. So I'm basically taking that equation, taking the $1,200 and putting it in there, and then solving for x. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract this from both sides, and I end up with this. And then I'm going to divide both sides by a negative 37.18, and I end up with x is equal to about 15.16, and these are ounces. And if I write it in a sentence, what the regression equation is telling me, it's if you spend, or I spend, $1,200 for a bike frame, you can expect that the frame is going to weigh about 15 ounces. And I went ahead and dropped that, because when I put it in a sentence, it's at that point that I'm just making it make sense. And finally down here it says use your regression equation now to predict how much you'd have to spend if you had a 30-ounce frame. So I'm basically going to do the same thing. I'm starting off with the equation that I got out of the calculator, but this time instead of plugging in a number for the y, which represents the cost, I'm plugging in 30, the weight, because x represents weight. And I'm going to go ahead and multiply this, add this to it, and this is what I get. I rounded it off to 2 places. And my response in the form of a sentence is, to get a bike with a frame that weighs 30 ounces, you can expect to pay about $633. And that's my story on problem number 1.